So think about this and think about that story, that true story about somebody trying to recruit somebody here. And we need to start thinking of talent in a different way. We need to sort of move from talent as just purely looking at a transactional or a compliance HR function to talent as marketing and talent acquisition. And that's why we have these two speakers here. We've very quietly been working with 5 companies throughout our market on a pilot workforce project to specifically look at our ability to attract talent and change the messages and the images of how people look at our community. So our first speaker, part of the team, is Dean Whitaker. Dean is with Whitaker and Associates. He's CEO. It's a data analytics company providing target marketing research and trend analysis for economic development, real estate, and corporate clients. They specialize in identifying business opportunities by predicting corporate behavior through the use of proprietary predictive algorithms. And then we have Kara DeBott. Kara really comes from the talent world. She's the founder of Pareto People. She's been working for the past 10 years recruiting companies in the technology sector with a focus primarily in Silicon Valley and the Midwest. She's also an Indiana University graduate at law school. She is a lawyer. Where's Ben? Where's Ben Shoulders? IU, right up here. So you have that connection. So I want them to tell you a little bit about the pilot project. We're not going to go in great detail. They will be available. Some of the companies who are participating in the pilot are actually in here. We're not going to really talk about the companies per se, but it's telling us a lot. In particular, yes, it's about people, but it's also about process and alignment. So, Dean, please.
Good morning. How are you all doing? Hanging in there? Doing all right? We're going to take a few minutes, and I mean a few, 10 minutes for me, 10 minutes for Kara, and tell you about a very important project that we think matters a lot to your community. You are doing something that is pioneering, and sometimes we call it an experiment. Right now we're calling it a pilot project. So I want to honor you for being willing to take on this pilot project, and Greg too, for your willingness to take on this challenge. And so the pilot project actually has 3 components, and it started with an idea. And the idea was, what if we could take layoff information? Anyone familiar with what a WARN notice is? Any of you HR people out here know what a WARN notice? It's really a requirement by the federal government that if you employ more than 50 people and lay anyone off, you have to give the state, that state, 60 days advance notice. And that gets published, so it's public data. What we've done is we've gone state by state every month and collected those layoff notices. And then we tag them with DUNS numbers and industrial classification codes, link it over to the LinkedIn profile and the Facebook pages of the people being laid off. You got the gist of the idea? So what we're doing with this layoff database is identifying people that are about to become available for other opportunities. I'll say it that way. And if any of your names are on the list, I'll let you know at the end of the session, all right? So really what we're really looking at, how many of you, what percentage of the people you work with you think will be retiring in the next 3 years? How many think 25%? 25%? How many in the next 5 years think 50% of your coworkers will retire, right? A lot of you. We're not thinking about that, and we're not prepared for that. And one of the consequences of that is we're not building up those teams of people and making those transitions possible. And Kim did such a wonderful job in her talk, so I won't go into too much more, because I'm a baby boomer, and we have a Gen X/millennial that I'm co-presenting with. And talk about the challenges, Kim, they're all there, how we communicate with each other. So one of the things that I've been involved in economic development for about 40 years. I started out working at a state level, county and chamber of commerce work. But one of the things that I've been concerned about is the availability of talent and how that's going to impact communities' ability to attract and retain companies. We're going to see companies move specifically for talent. They're going to be looking at your area, talent first, everything else will be second. So do you have the people that I need to staff my company so I can grow it here or so I can locate here? So we're going to see a lot of that happening. So we're looking at data-driven. So this is really the idea that we're using data to try to answer the question, what people are coming on the market and when will those people be available? The Chamber is launching an interesting initiative called EchoNet, by username right now, but it's really about a longer-term play. That's really like from preschool all the way through continual learning. What we're talking about is how do you fix the problem today? There's a couple of companies that we won't go into too much detail because I don't think it's appropriate, but they're going to lose 20% of their maintenance people in the next 2 years. So you think about a company that's facing that kind of turnover, and Kim talked about that. What happens when us baby boomers move off the stage? What happens to those positions? What happens to those companies? So we set out to kind of gather data. So Kara has been out interviewing companies, talking to HR people. We're looking for the information that you're going to hear a little more from Chris about in terms of what are the critical skills that you're having a hard time filling. What has changed? What is different now than, say, 5 years ago? And that is, some companies are telling us, hey, we had 30 people in our pipeline, today we have none. Those are pretty scary kind of conversations that we're having with folks. So we're out gathering data, trying to figure out what are the critical elements that we have to have in order to be able to identify what those skill sets are that are needed and how do we go about gathering them. So we've really been starting to look at skill sets. And we looked at a couple areas currently. One is production workers, another is healthcare, particularly nurses, and we began looking at those, and maintenance people. Those are the 3 areas that we've been studying most recently. I don't know if you're all having that kind of issues with tracking those talent sets, but that's kind of what we've been working on, and we're still refining. Again, this is a preliminary conversation. We're 2 months into a 3-month pilot, so we have a ways to go yet. But the first step that I mentioned was we're building a national searchable database of layoff notices. This happens to be the layoffs in August that occurred nationally within manufacturing. That represents over 6,000 people that are about to be laid off from their work. So we're beginning to look at how do we go about recruiting that group of people that have the skill sets that are critical to the area. For example, this is what a layoff notice looks like, and if you notice, it will list the skill sets. So this happens to be a layoff notice for a company in Scottsburg, Indiana, well, 100 miles away, right? Well, one of the skill sets that caught my eye was the maintenance person. So we have a maintenance manager that's going to be laid off, according to this layoff notice, soon. So that just kind of perks our interest. We developed a profile about that particular company. We identify the events, the people, and also kind of an overview of the company, and then this goes over to Kara, who's been working with some of the HR people at this company, just to see how we can go about attracting that people. So using LinkedIn, we were able to identify some of the people that are at the company. Then we did the same thing for the healthcare layoffs. In August, in July, there were 19 hospitals that closed. Let's see, the next month there were 5 that have closed. So there's 24 companies that have laid off their entire hospital staff. One of the companies happens to be Kindred. Anyone know the company, Indianapolis company, hospital? They're closing down and they're laying off 62 people. So we're looking at them, and in that group, there were 10 nurses, 10 LNs. There were also, I think, 4 RNs. So we begin to see where are the sources of people that we can go attract today, not next year, not next month. What could you do today to start filling some of these gaps? And so we developed a profile on this company as well. The next step in our pilot project is to tie it back into LinkedIn marketing. And we've heard a lot about LinkedIn marketing today. And so it's really about how can we use social media to communicate the availability of job opportunities in Evansville. So we started looking at how do we develop a LinkedIn and Facebook advertising campaign to reach the people that are being laid off and beyond that. We've been working with Sabrina at the coalition to identify how do we create that marketing campaign and what does it look like. And Sabrina's been doing a wonderful job on developing the ads for Facebook and also the persona, the profile of the person we want to attract. With social media, you can really identify both demographics, psychographics, and geographics. And you heard from Kim what some of the trends are within those different groups of people that we want to communicate with. So we're looking at all of those profiles as a way to identify and use our social media marketing campaign to reach that audience. Next, I would like to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Kara, and talk a little bit more about the recruiting process and what we've learned so far.
Thank you, Dean. So I think most of you who are here today already sort of know this, that the market is changing. Things aren't the way that they were even maybe 6 months ago or 5 years ago. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how do we address that as things continue to change and evolve. And you have open positions. I think there was a study in 2014 that it costs the US economy $160 billion a year for unfilled vacancies, unfilled positions. So how do we get people into those jobs? And if our process isn't working now, what can we do to change it? So this is the recruiting process then. Makes a ton of sense. You have, we'll use maybe a manufacturing position. So you have a ton of applicants, as most people who are in HR or recruiting know. You have a ton of applicants, and half of them have none of the qualifications. So you don't even know. They don't have a degree, or they don't have the training, or they want to get into the role, but it's not going to work. So that's a lot of work. It's a lot of time to go through 100 applicants or 1,000 applicants. And so the process that I think a lot of companies have today is one that is meant to weed out candidates and really minimize the amount of time that the company's spending weeding out candidates to find the good ones. So you'd see a process that just sort of hypothetically looks something like this. You have a bunch of applicants, you outsource that. Send all those applicants to somebody else. Let's pay an RPO, let's pay another firm to go through all those applicants, and then reach out to the people who look relatively decent. We'll ask the candidate, number 2, are you still interested? So this is step 2 in this process. Do you still want this position? Maybe it's now 3 weeks later after they applied, or maybe it's 6 weeks later. Then we'll say, okay, go take this work skills test. We need to know that you have the basic skills for this position. So here's the information, go schedule it, go take the test, let us know if you pass. So now, who knows, maybe we're at 2 months, 3 months in the process. They come back in, and then we want to maybe do a group panel interview. So we're going to have them sit somewhere and wait till we can have 10 candidates come in at one time. So we're just kind of minimizing, we're going to maximize the time of the people in our company. So we'll bring them in a panel of 10, we'll interview them, we'll pick the best ones, then maybe we'll do the specific skill set interview, then we'll get to offer and we'll hire. So that's a great process if you have tons and tons of applicants. Maybe not so great of a process if you don't have enough applicants to make it work. So I think the thing to look at here is, who's responsible for this? So this is one of the questions, kind of the takeaways. Who's ultimately responsible for recruiting? In my business, it is me. My clients will look to me and go, where are the candidates? Where are the hires? Do something to solve this. We believe that we can do something to solve it, and it's just a matter of tweaking and finding different ways to do it. Who's involved? So who are and we'll talk about this in a second, who are the hiring managers? Who are the people feeling the pain of not having those positions filled? How long is this process taking? Is this something that can you find a great candidate and get them through your process in 4 weeks? Or is this something that's going to take 6 months? And really the central theme here, we've talked a lot about people and their experience and how to get the most out of them and collaborate and retain them. What is your candidate experience like here? I mean, does anybody think this candidate experience feels particularly warm? Probably not. The other agency is going to reach out, then they're going to get bounced to this person and that person, who would be their central point of contact if they had a question. What if a star candidate has an offer and they need to tell this company, hey, I have an offer coming up, but I love you, I want to work for you? Who would they even go to? There could be a lot of different people in that process. Our next one, which unfortunately is a reality for a lot of companies in the US and everywhere at this point. If you rely on applicants, or you're used to being an employer of choice or a destination, and you're just used to people coming to you and you have that previous process, what do you do if there's no one in that pipeline? I don't know. And I think that's what a lot of people are trying to figure out right now is what do we do if what we've been doing isn't working? So there's a ton of different things that you can do to help, and over here there's a couple of the possibilities. You can do job posting campaigns. We saw a Monster commercial. I don't know, it's still out there these days, but Indeed is a big one. You can do LinkedIn. You can, do employee events, all kinds of stuff. Company branding is a huge one. And I'll show in a second an example from Glassdoor, but kind of thinking about what is your brand. Maybe it's something that regionally people know really well, but these days with social media and that ability to influence, potentially 1,000 people with one bad story, did you guys read the story about the female engineer at Uber? Basically ended up being a main reason that the CEO had to step down because of just this really sort of nasty culture. And then Google had an example with another one. Social media marketing, which is part of our pilot. So we're going to be looking at people who, maybe are from Evansville originally, who are in like these, kind of specific areas, manufacturing or nursing that we're looking at, doing ads to target them. So when you're scrolling through your feed, you're like, oh, Evansville. Yes, I'm a nurse. I want to go home. Something like that. The layoff database, employee referral programs are huge and one of the best possible ways to attract talent and retain talent. People know other good people. That's one of the best resources to invest in if you aren't doing that right now. Passive candidate recruiting. So active candidates would be people actively looking for positions. They're your applicants, the people you're going to have to sift through. Your passive candidates are arguably more likely to be your strongest candidates. They're the people who are happy in their current position. They're doing really well. I spend really 100% of my career with these passive candidates, maybe 95 if a few active jump in there, but it's looking at, you're 85% happy in your current position. How do we get you to 100%? And I'll ask people on the phone, I'll say, tell me what your ideal opportunity is. If you can tell me about the perfect culture, the perfect location, the perfect role, what is your family situation like? Do you, need to work from home? Do you need flexible hours? Like, tell me everything that would be of interest to you. And then trying to match that. And then agencies. So there's a whole, spectrum of agencies that can help, from contingency, which, sometimes can be helpful if they're specialized, retained, if it's really difficult position to fill, and kind of, asking someone to really focus on that position. There's companies that will come in and kind of embed themselves within your recruiting department or your HR department, and will help advise and set up better strategies. Really with recruiting, one of the big things is you need to have an owner. So if everyone sort of says, well, who's responsible for recruiting? Who's responsible for filling these pipelines? If the fingers kind of all point at each other, or they point at somebody who maybe doesn't have a strong background in talent acquisition, but sort of defaults to, well, yeah, I'm HR, but I've just sort of scheduled interviews and dealt with pipelines, might not be, maybe the best solution, or maybe there needs to be some advisement in there, and enthusiasm. So recruiting is, some people argue, but it's sales in a lot of ways. It's marketing, it's sales, it's saying, we're awesome, you should come join us because this is the type of culture that we have, and you would be a great fit because. A big piece of that is executive support too. So recruiting is not something that should detract from a position. If your focus is engineering or your focus is managing a plant or something, if recruiting is a piece of that, then it needs to be a priority piece of it, not something that sort of gets pushed to the bottom of the day because it's something that you don't enjoy doing. And I think that starts with the CEO, starts with the top of the company, prioritizing that, being there, being accessible and top down. Making sure that you're resourcing appropriately. So if you have a star candidate, maybe the Michigan State, I'm a Michigan State alum as well, so we'll say the Michigan State candidate that you want to recruit to Evansville, do you have the resources to talk to that person? Can somebody have a 45-minute conversation with him, maybe not entry level, but maybe experienced, about what his goals are, what his family needs are, what motivates him, what he's interested in? Can we get that picture of him and kind of help sell him along the way? Do we have the resources for that, or are we just putting out fires? really looking at that candidate experience. And I think that's one of the great things that Evansville has to offer. That I love the E is for Everyone Evansville campaign, and just I was even saying, traveling here, I normally, I'm from Michigan originally, but most of my work's in San Francisco Bay Area, so when I travel, I mostly go west. And when we were coming here, we flew through Detroit to Evansville, and it would only take like one woman, struggling with her bag maybe once or twice before somebody would come up and help her. And she would say, thank you, and it happened multiple times, and it took me by surprise, because going west, I don't know, we just, no, I'll do it myself, I'll get it myself. That kind of behavior just doesn't happen as frequently. And so it was just really nice, and kind of, that's, I think, one thing Evansville can offer, is that warmth, and that we care about you, we want you to be a part of our community, we want to, embrace you. And then I think looking at the process as well, so that's something I'm going to leave you with today, is to kind of think about your companies and what your process looks like and how that would feel. And then looking at data. So, we still want to have efficient processes. We don't want to waste people's time in the interview process. This is one example that I don't know how many of you kind of look at like company branding or where people go for information, or if you're questioning like, hey, we used to be like the destination for employment opportunities, but now we're not. There's so many places that people go for information now. They're not just listening to the 5 people that they live with or that they're really close to. They're on social media, they're looking. This is a company in the Bay Area that I actually haven't worked with, I'm not that familiar with. It's kind of like a YouTube for gamers. And so this is Glassdoor, and it shows, they have all these reviews and where they are and what they do and the jobs that they have posted. And then you can see the overall trend here is showing that they were rated almost a 5, up like by a 4.6, but in the last year, they're down to a 3.3, and why did that happen? So those are all based on on employee reviews or like interviews. And there wasn't an event, like there wasn't some kind of public major issue that I could find in my brief research, and it looked like it's really about the CEO. It's about the CEO and the company growing so fast that it's a little bit unorganized. You kind of get in, you're not really sure what you're doing. The CEO is apparently amazing, but maybe they do more of what caters to what he wants to do than maybe what's best for users or that the team suggests they should do. And I just kind of summarize that reading the reviews in there. So I think that's something to look at. Like, does your company have a Glassdoor profile? What do users say? Do you have a 56% would say don't come work here? That's the parent dinner conversation, right? Don't go work in manufacturing. Don't go work at this company. 50% think the company has a good outlook. That's not good. Candidates get their information from everywhere. Word of mouth, reputation, Facebook, LinkedIn, Quora, stock market if you're a public company. So start looking at what people are seeing. This looks like a lot of information. I'll just go through it very briefly, but this is kind of what I would argue recruiting looks like or should look like. A lot of people put recruiting under HR and say that it's just a piece of HR, just not really its own thing. Certainly in the Bay Area, and I would certainly argue they're very different things. There's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen between the two, and you can kind of see that at like the middle point here with, if you just go up with it, the onboarding piece, making sure that in recruiting, we're identifying the right talent, we're recruiting the right talent, we have the right company pitch, we're marketing towards the right people, we're really finding out what motivates and inspires them, and then we're matching those job skills with what the performance management side is going to look like with HR, right? Making sure that we're not telling them something that's not true, that we're hiring the right skills that are going to do really well. And then the human resources piece doing what they do really well, which is, culture, growth, retention, training, benefits. And so this whole process, everyone sort of works together. I could go into a lot of detail there, so happy to talk more about those specific pieces. But at the bottom there, you have your candidate experience. And so the more seamless that is, the more intentionality that's behind it, the better it's likely going to be. So basically, at the end of the day, recruiting is not magic. I know people wish that it was, and that you could come to me and I would say, poof, here's your perfect person, take them today. They don't even need to give 2 weeks notice. But it takes time and commitment takes resources, and it takes enthusiasm. So if you have people in this role that don't love what they're doing, that's going to show. It's going to go to the bottom of the list. It takes, having that focus. So I think going home, like one of the things to maybe consider about what you could do to impact your company, look at your process. So imagine your perfect candidate for your team or your company or the positions that are most urgent for your company. Can you identify that perfect candidate? If star candidate comes into that process, who's going to know? If you're the hiring manager, how many people will they have to filter through and how long could that take? How is that person going to feel? If they're a star candidate and they apply and nobody gets back to them for 2 weeks, do you think that makes them feel really valued and desired? Probably not. In fact, apparently millennials will only wait 2 weeks for like the perfect job offer, which is a very short period of time. So that makes me nervous too. 2 weeks is not long, but your process has to be able to identify and elevate the very best candidates and get them through. And then really think about what you can do to help recruit and retain top talent as well. What, I guess, skills do you bring and enthusiasm, and are you in an influential role to be able to talk about that and get the conversation going to make some changes? So that's it.
Well, I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to allow us to do this pilot project in your community. You're the first one in the country that we know of that's doing this. So it's an experiment, so kind of put it under experimental, but the courage and leadership that you show to do this says something a lot about your community. The fact you're having this meeting today is phenomenal, because you're at the front end of the parade of what we see coming as we look at trends down the road. You're addressing an issue that's going to be very, very important to your community's future. And as Greg was saying, the decisions you make today is going to determine where you end up in the future. You have 3 futures. You have all the options are out there. You have the trajectory you're on currently, or you have a preferred future. And it depends on the choices you make today will determine which of those futures you end up at. So I really want to thank Greg and his team. They've been wonderful to work with. We've had a great experience so far with our pilot project. And to thank all of you for allowing us to do the pilot. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got, we can take a couple of questions if you have any more about what we've learned so far or anything you want to know about the pilot. Questions? We're using a good question. She asked, what's the metrics for the pilot? How do we know if we're accomplishing what we set out to do? Part of it is the social media marketing campaign has the metrics built into it. So we're getting feedback, and we've just tagged the E for Everyone campaign. Sabrina's built a landing page that will be measuring the traffic to the landing page from that. We'll also be looking at actually identifying the candidates and helping get them placed. So that's be another measure that we'll look at. But those are some of the metrics that we've started to look at, just to, how do we know, right? How do we know if this is going to work or not? And so we're looking at the social media feedback primarily, and Greg was very appropriately concerned about that on the front end of our pilot. How do we know what we've learned? The thing that I think is most surprising to us is the issue is far bigger than we thought. I know that sounds kind of silly coming from where we are. I thought we were coming down here to help fill the pipeline. And then we started looking at the process, and it's a big issue, both in terms of the pipeline and the process. So that's kind of one of our takeaways so far.
Yeah, and I think, again, to reiterate, it's not something that's unique to this area. In fact, I think in a lot of ways, you're at the forefront of it. There's a lot of communities that are talking about talent and what a problem it is and what we're going to do and this and that, but that's where they're stuck, right? And so it's sort of taking that next step about what we're going to do about it. And so I think that's where we can try to bring talent in. This is happening a lot with like the venture capital, tech industries too, and startups. We can do everything that we can to bring in experienced tech talent, but there has to be a place for them to land and a process that can accommodate taking those unique interests and experiences and getting them into roles that will benefit companies and, having some flexibility and runway on both sides. So, yeah.
Other questions? Thank you again for the opportunity. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask, so you mentioned a 3-month timeline for the project. Thank you. So is it after the 3 months that you would give recommendations or report outs, or what was that process?
Actually, we have meetings weekly with Greg and his crew now to talk about where we're at and what we're learning at each stage along the way. Towards the end of the project, we're going to do a webinar on what we've learned and give you some feedback on what we found out. And so we'll be sharing back in a webinar format then, primarily talking about the recruiting process and what we've learned in throughout the pilot.
And I think more specifically to each company that's a client too, that's kind of involved in this specifically, and being able to share some feedback and points and kind of meeting with the team. You know, hopefully we'll start to have some candidates coming through our Facebook postings and our layoff databases and LinkedIn. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you again. We're so appreciative of what you're doing to allow us to do this pilot here.
Thank you.